The red tunnel was bathed in the kind of hazy glow you get in a dark room when you're developing photos. So long as I could see my hand in front of my face, I wasn't going to freak. But that was the only good thing about the situation. Then we fell into a room. Some sort of internal organ. The walls, floor, and ceiling were pink, pulsating flesh, ribbed and liberally coated with slippery mucus. Once again, both Arlene and I were naked as jaybirds. Instinctively, I covered myself again, just as I had before.
"Oh, come on, Fly," Arlene complained. "You're a human being, thank God. We have little enough to remind us of who we are and why we're here. We don't need you being shy on top of everything else."
I slowly took my hands away, but I tried not to look too hard at Arlene. I didn't trust myself. We were buddies. I wanted it to stay that way.
"This place stinks,"
Arlene said. Maybe my nose had stopped working. I counted myself lucky. The organ was diseased, sickly, and I was glad I couldn't smell it. There was a downward slope that wasn't so steep as to cause us to lose our footing altogether, but I wasn't comfortable as we stumbled through the giant organ. I had a disturbing sense of what organ it was. A place we've all been before.
"I just had a bad thought, Fly. I hope whatever burned away our clothes didn't also burn away all the microbes in our guts that help us digest food. Without them, we'll die of starvation no matter how much we eat."
"I doubt it," I said, my voice shaky, as if I hadn't used it for decades. I don't feel ravenously hungry, so evidently the gate left the MRE food in my stomach. Probably left the microbes as well. Anything organic. We both jumped when the demonic uterus started contracting. I had always hated amusement parks. Then we were sliding out of control. I grabbed Arlene's hand and she squeezed hard. The contractions pushed us along the floor to a door, a giant semi-transparent cyst membrane with a doorknob in the middle. The knob was made of some kind of cartilage. I pushed my arm into a wet opening, all the way to the shoulder, and turned the knob. 2 corpses were on the other side. They'd only been shadows seen through the membrane. We couldn't tell what they were. One was male, the other female. After our experience with Deja Vu, I experienced a momentary shock of thinking the bodies were our own. They weren't, but they could have been related to us. Similar body types, similar faces. I sure as hell knew who they were, though. One was the third woman in Fox Company besides Dardier and Arlene, Midori Yoshida. The man was Lieutenant Weems. I felt a curious lack of emotion looking at the pair. They lay in an awkward position, head to head, each with a pistol in the other's mouth. It was pretty clearly a suicide pact. I supposed because of finding themselves in hell. Arlene leaned down to separate them, and we made a horrific discovery. They weren't just lying tete-a-tete. Their heads were joined together, fused at the crowns, the scalp flowing smoothly from one to the other, like Siamese twins joined at the head. The hair color faded continuously from blonde, Weems, to black, Yoshida, without seam or break. Jesus and Mary, I gasped.
"I don't guess there's any question why they blew their brains out,"
Arlene whispered, dropping the bodies. Arlene silently pointed to bloody imp prints all around the bodies. We both knew the shape of an imp footprint when we saw one. Judging from the depth of the heels, the bastards had been dancing around the bodies of their human victims. I spat at one of the footprints. Arlene gripped my shoulder.
"Fly, please don't think I'm a ghoul, but god damn it, we need those pistols. And as much as I like looking at your manly chest, I think we need some clothes too. Definitely the boots."
She had a point. A stomach-turning, revolting point, but still one against which I couldn't argue. We spent the next several minutes robbing the corpses and throwing up in the corner, but afterward we each had a pistol and 26 rounds. To exit the room, we had to squeeze through a narrow opening that looked exactly like... well, I didn't like to even think about it. I volunteered to go first, and she didn't object.
Fly,
came her voice as we wriggled and writhed through the orifice.
do you ever get the feeling you're being born again?
I'm not a huge fan of morbid jokes. This time all I could do was shudder. Arlene, maybe we shouldn't be pissing off the only friend we've got down here by blasphemy. The moist, decaying walls pressed in around my shoulders, but I could still push through, and where I went it was easy for Arlene to follow. The thought crossed my mind that the passage might narrow so much that I'd become stuck. I wasn't completely rational about this one. I was so glad to pop out the other end that I barely minded the 7 imps waiting on the other side. For one truly insane moment, I wondered if that would make Arlene Snow White. Then, I was busy again, doing my job. Arlene was right behind me, doing her job. We only had a brace of pistols. The sons of bitches didn't stand a chance. As was the usual case after a good killing, we took advantage of the opportunity to do more sightseeing. Not once did I regret that neither of us had thought to bring a camera.
So, this is hell,
Arlene said. What they want us to think of as the infernal regions, I replied. Hell was made of fleshy walls, an open field whose ground was mottled scalp with comically giant, prickly hairs growing out of randomly scattered tufts, rivers of fire, a black and red swirling sky, and air that stank of urine, decayed flowers, and bitter lemons. There may have been a hint of old cat boxes mixed in there as well. Come to think of it, I continued, not a bad try.
One of their more creative efforts.
We saw a single door sagging with moldy, rotten timbers. The stonework lintel was crumbling. Arlene strolled to the unpromising portal and made a close inspection.
Fly, come look at this.
I went, but my stomach wished I hadn't. There were mites, or larvae, eating away at the stone, the wood, the fleshy walls, everything.
Quite an attention to detail,
Arlene said, as if evaluating an artwork. The next moment she stopped being an art critic. A cloud of tiny creatures came off into the air as if we'd pounded on the door, but neither of us had touched anything. They settled on her. More followed, and they settled on me. Holding up my hand, I could see dozens of little specks spreading across my flesh, and there was a very slight itch.
Damn it! Get off of me!
Arlene shook her arms wildly, but enjoyed no more success than I. We ran, rolled, and still the little vermin hung on. They were worse than lint. Ah, the hell with it, I said. They don't seem to be killing us. First chance we'll take a bath.
Or go through a teleporter,
she said. Being living organisms, they would probably go through with us. No, we'll look for water.
Or flea dip.
She probably had a very good idea there, but her voice cracked. She held on by main force. Can't stand here forever, I said. Let's pop it. I cracked the seal. Surprise! A pair of larger-than-life pumpkins floated out. At least they weren't going to crawl around on our skin. They were up high enough that we ducked and managed to avoid being seen. They sailed past, looking for hoops and nets. The pumpkins saw the dead imps and floated over to investigate, providing us with the opportunity of darting through the doorway. Inside, we found a single shotgun and a few shells. Arlene picked it up and tossed it to me. I was touched. We soldiered on. To the left, we saw a rickety, wooden walkway over a pool of boiling red stuff that seemed to be a cross between lava and the traditional green toxin. Annoyingly, it was the only way to go. As we began to cross cautiously, the path started to give way. For some reason, neither of us was the least bit surprised. There was nowhere to go but forward before the pathetic bridge collapsed into the evil fluid below. We ran like hell, but at the end we were blocked by what appeared to be a solid stone wall. I threw myself at the wall, hoping to grab a handful, and Arlene could grab me. Instead, we ended up very much alive on the other side of the illusion. There was no wall. If we were startled by the turn of events, the imps we had landed on were downright stunned. The shotgun lost its virginity then and there. Arlene took care of a few stragglers with her 10mm. This time, when we lifted our eyes from the carnage of the moment, we were in for a real surprise. Right in front of us was the figure of a human being wrapped in something sticky and suspended from the ceiling by his feet. We could tell by his clothing that he was a UAC civilian. We could tell from his groans that he was alive. He was tall, nearly 2 meters. He was overweight and suffering a lot more because of it. The stomach hanging at a painful angle, his belt about to come loose. Blood had trickled down his wrists from where he had tried to free himself.
God, he's still kicking,
Arlene said, focusing on the only important thing. I looked close. The man appeared to be wrapped up in spider webs. The web suspending him from the ceiling was thick and didn't look like we could easily break it. Is there a knife anywhere? We pulled UAC boxes over and rummaged through them. No knife, but a bottle would break to serve the purpose. Arlene sliced, and I cushioned his fall as he came down, grunting at the weight. Good thing there were some medical supplies in the UAC boxes. The man was in shock. Arlene pushed some D5W saline to pump up the volume. After a while, his eyes opened. He stared at us without comprehension. I expected that. "Can you hear me?" I asked and got nothing. "If you understand me, nod your head." That took a moment, but he finally nodded. Arlene massaged his neck and I held a finger in front of him until he focused on it.
"Are you all right?"
Arlene asked him at last. He grunted in a low, husky voice, carrying all the pain. "Who are you?" I asked.
"Bill Rich,"
he said, groggily.
"How long were you up there?"
Arlene asked. Further proof that life was coming back into him was the way he shuddered.
"Long enough that I thought I'd died."
"Who put you up there?" I asked.
"The goblin,"
he answered.
"Spider mind."
Oh, great. A whole new nomenclature. That narrowed it down to any of the monsters. If we ever reported to Earth, we would need to settle on a common terminology.
"Congratulations,"
said Arlene.
"For what?"
he asked, half turning to her, still dizzy.
"Surviving."
It was a big deal finding another human who could move and wasn't a damned zombie. We would have opened a bottle of champagne and celebrated if we'd had the time, or the booze. As it was, Rich was stunned to receive a mouthful of cold water, if still a bit confused. Following a corridor that looped around, we wound up back at the same damned central entrance. I would never enjoy an amusement park again. Peeking cautiously around the corner, I saw we had company. Tired of inspecting the dead imps outside. Pumpkins in the air. Pumpkins everywhere. They roared in frustration and shot their nasty little balls of electricity at each other. Important datum. Pumpkins are immune to their own weapons. And I made a note to see how they responded to being baked in a pie.
"Were those the goblins you meant?"
Arlene whispered to Rich. He shook his head, but his grim expression left no doubt that he'd encountered pumpkins before.
They're so freaking stupid,
Arlene said contemptuously. You'd think something that was all head would have more brains, I added. The next step was obvious for those of us with brains. We dashed across the corridor to another closed door. I opened it a crack while Arlene kept watch, making sure the pumpkins didn't float back. Rich obviously hadn't received military training, but he caught on fast. Considering what he'd been through, he was a quick study. He kept pace, which was all we really needed from him at the moment. Through the door, I saw 2 pumpkins on the inside as well, hanging with a bunch of imps. Taking a deep breath, I waited until a mob of spinies marched between the door and the nearest pumpkin. Then I stepped out and fired 5 or 6 unaimed rounds. These guys didn't merit any wasted shotgun shells. Having done my damage, I popped back and braced the door. Arlene and Rich helped. One thing you can say about pumpkins, they don't let a little obstacle like imps stand between them and their target. And one thing you can say about imps, they don't like being shot by balls of electricity. We left them to each other's mercies. Over the sound of carnage, Rich shouted at me.
"How'd you get them fighting each other?"
"We do it all the time," said Arlene, smiling.
"It's the Iago tactic."
"I'm impressed." I watched for the 2 in the hall, but they'd gotten tired of shooting each other and returned to shoot the imp carcasses. When the sounds behind the door died down, I slowly cracked it. I saw a lot of dead imps on the floor, and the remains of 1 deflated pumpkin on top. I assumed the other one must be on the bottom of the pile. That's when I made a huge mistake.